The Velthari Empire had ruled the Orion sector for 12,000 years. Their ships were the fastest. Their weapons were the strongest. Their word was law across 47 star systems. When they spoke, lesser species listened and obeyed. This was how things had always been, and this was how things would always remain. Or so they believed. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the window of her small office on Station 12, watching the massive Velthari warships drift past like metal mountains in the void. Each one was longer than a city and carried enough firepower to turn a planet into ash. She had been stationed here for 3 months now, the first human diplomat allowed into Velthari space. It was supposed to be an honor. Most days, it felt like a punishment. The office was small, just a desk, a chair, and a window. The Velthari had given her the worst room they could find without being openly rude. The heating barely worked. The lighting was too dim for human eyes. The food they provided was technically edible but tasted like wet cardboard. None of this bothered Sarah. She had not come here for comfort. "Ambassador Chen," said her assistant Marcus, stepping into the room with a tablet in his hands. He was a young man with dark skin and careful eyes. He had been assigned to help her 3 months ago and had learned quickly that working with Sarah meant long hours and strange requests. "The Velthari Council has denied your request again. They say humans are too new to space to have any voice in sector matters." Sarah sighed. This was the 15th rejection in 3 months. The Velthari did not think much of humans. To them, humanity was just another young species that had stumbled into faster-than-light travel by accident. They expected humans to bow and scrape like all the other species did. They expected humans to know their place. But Sarah had not traveled 40 light-years from Earth to bow to anyone. "What is their official reason this time?" she asked, turning from the window. Marcus looked at his tablet. "They say that species who have been in space for less than 500 years cannot participate in council decisions. It is their law." "Their law," Sarah repeated. She sat down at her desk and folded her hands. "Marcus, do you know why the Velthari have so many laws?" "I believe they value order, Ambassador." "No," Sarah said. "They have so many laws because every law is a wall to keep other species out, a wall to keep them on top, a wall to make sure nothing ever changes." She picked up a small data chip from her desk and looked at it thoughtfully. "Did you finish the translation work I asked for?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, but I must tell you, the records are very old. Some of them go back 8,000 years. The Velthari do not share their history with outsiders. Getting these files was not easy. I had to trade 3 months of coffee rations to a Thessian merchant who knew a Velthari archivist." "I know, you did good work." Sarah plugged the chip into her computer and began to read. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen, and as she read, a small smile appeared on her face. "Marcus, I think it is time we taught the Velthari something about diplomacy." Marcus looked nervous. "What are you planning, Ambassador?" "The only thing a diplomat ever plans, a conversation." The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with High Counselor Veth, the leader of the Velthari government. To her surprise, the request was granted. Usually, the Velthari made her wait for weeks. This time, she was summoned within hours. The council chamber was a vast hall made of black stone and silver metal. The ceiling was so high that Sarah could barely see it. Massive pillars lined the walls, each one carved with scenes from Velthari history. Battles, conquests, the subjugation of lesser species. The message was clear. The Velthari were strong and they wanted everyone to remember it. Around the room sat the 12 members of the High Council, each one a Velthari noble from one of the great families. They were tall beings, nearly 3 meters in height, with gray skin and 4 eyes that glowed faintly blue. Their bodies were thin but strong, covered in patterns of silver that marked their age and rank. They looked down at Sarah like gods examining an insect. High Counselor Veth sat in the center, upon a throne carved from a single piece of dark crystal. He was older than the others, his skin marked with more silver patterns than anyone else in the room. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. "Human ambassador," Veth said, "you have requested to speak before this council many times. Each time we have told you the same thing: your species is too young. Your voice does not matter here. Why do you continue to waste our time?" Sarah stood alone in the center of the chamber, looking very small under the eyes of the Velthari lords. But her voice was steady when she spoke. "High Counselor, I come before you today not to ask for a voice in your council. I come to ask a simple question." Veth's 4 eyes narrowed. "What question?" "I want to know about the Kelish." The chamber went silent. The air itself seemed to freeze. Several council members shifted in their seats. One of them dropped a stylus and did not move to pick it up. Sarah saw something flash across Veth's face. It was there for only a moment, but she caught it. Fear. "The Kelish are not your concern," Veth said, his voice harder now. "They are a dead species. They have been gone for 8,000 years. "Yes," Sarah said. "They have been gone for exactly 8,342 years. Do you know what happened 8,342 years ago, High Counselor?" Veth did not answer. "I do," Sarah continued. 8,342 years ago, the Kelish were the most powerful species in this sector. They had ruled for nearly 20,000 years. They had ships and weapons far beyond anything the Velthari had at the time. The Velthari were a young species then, new to space, trying to find their place among the stars, just like humans are now. "You speak of ancient history," Veth said dismissively. "This has nothing to do with now." "But it does," Sarah said. She pulled out a small device and activated it. A holographic image appeared in the air before her, rotating slowly so everyone in the chamber could see it. It showed an old document, written in the Velthari script. "This is a record from your own archives. It is a trade agreement between the Velthari and the Kelish, signed 8,350 years ago. Do you know what it says?" No one on the council spoke. The silence was so complete that Sarah could hear the hum of the station's power systems through the walls. "It says that the Velthari agree to serve as laborers in Kelish mining operations. It says that the Velthari will provide 10,000 workers each year to work in Kelish factories. It says that the Velthari will pay tribute to the Kelish Empire in the form of minerals and metals." Sarah paused, letting the words sink in. "It says that the Velthari are a lesser species who must know their place." The council erupted. Lords were shouting at each other in the Velthari language, their voices harsh and angry. Guards began moving towards Sarah, their weapons raised, but Veth raised his hand and everyone fell silent. "Where did you get this?" Veth asked quietly. His voice was calm, but Sarah could see his hands gripping the arms of his throne so hard that the crystal was cracking. "From your own archives," Sarah said. "They are very old files, very well hidden, but humans are good at finding things that others want to stay hidden." Veth stared at her for a long moment. "What do you want, human?" Sarah smiled. "I want what every species wants, High Counselor. I want respect. I want a voice. I want the Velthari to remember that they were once in the same position that humans are in now, and I want to know what happened to the Kelish." The chamber was completely silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, Veth spoke. "The Kelish were destroyed. We destroyed them. When they grew weak and corrupt, we rose up and swept them away. That is all there is to say." "I thought so," Sarah said. "That is the story everyone knows. The brave Velthari rising up against their cruel masters. But I found something else in your archives. Something that tells a different story. Something that I think the people of the 47 systems would find very interesting." Veth's 4 eyes burned with cold fury. "You are playing a dangerous game, human." "No," Sarah said. "I am playing diplomacy, and this is just the beginning." She turned and walked out of the council chamber, leaving the Velthari lords in stunned silence behind her. As she walked, she thought about what she had learned in those ancient files, the truth about how the Kelish had really fallen, the truth about what the Velthari had done to take power, the truth that had been hidden for 8,000 years. It was time to let that truth out, and when she did, nothing in the Orion sector would ever be the same. The news spread across the sector like fire through dry grass. Within 2 days of Ambassador Chen's appearance before the Velthari Council, every species in the 47 systems was talking about the human who had dared to challenge the High Counselor. No one had ever done such a thing. No one had ever thought it was possible. The Velthari were feared throughout the sector. Other species had tried to resist them over the centuries. All of them had been crushed. Worlds had been burned. Populations had been enslaved. The lesson was clear. Do not challenge the Velthari, accept your place. Survive. And then a single human woman had walked into their council chamber and thrown their history in their faces. Sarah sat in her office, watching the reports come in. The Velthari were trying to control the story. They had released statements saying that the human ambassador had behaved badly. They said she had violated diplomatic rules. They said her accusations were lies, but it was too late. The damage was done. The Morthian Trade Federation is asking for copies of the documents you showed the council, Marcus said, reading from his tablet as he paced around the small room. So are the Dren, the Korvathi, and about a dozen other species. Everyone wants to know what the Velthari are hiding. Send them what we have, Sarah said, but not everything, not yet. Marcus stopped packing. What are you waiting for? Sarah looked at him. The Velthari have been in power for a long time, Marcus. They have built their empire on 2 things, fear and secrets. If we release everything at once, they will find a way to spin it. They will make excuses. They will call it fake. They will say the humans created these documents to cause trouble. But if we release it slowly, piece by piece, they will have to keep responding. They will have to keep defending themselves. And sooner or later they will make a mistake. Marcus nodded slowly. You are not just trying to embarrass them. You are trying to break their power. No, Sarah said. I am trying to free the species they have been stepping on for 12,000 years. The Velthari are not evil, Marcus. Most of them are just ordinary people trying to live their lives. But their government is built on lies and fear. It has been for thousands of years. I am going to remind them what happens when you build your house on sand. Over the next few weeks, Sarah released more documents. She shared trade agreements that showed how the Velthari had cheated other species out of resources. She shared military records that showed how they had threatened and bullied smaller civilizations. She shared communications between council members that showed how they talked about other species in private. The words they used, the jokes they made, the contempt they felt for anyone who was not Velthari. Each revelation hit like a bomb. Species that had been loyal to the Velthari for centuries began to question that loyalty. Why were they paying tribute? Why were they accepting unfair trade deals? Why were they letting Velthari ships patrol their space? The council tried to fight back. They called Sarah to appear before them again. This time, the chamber was packed with representatives from a dozen other species who had demanded to be present. Veth had tried to refuse them, but the pressure was too great. For the first time in centuries, the Velthari Council was forced to open its doors to outsiders. High Counselor Veth stood before his throne, no longer sitting above everyone else. His voice was still strong, but Sarah could see the strain in his eyes. He had not slept well. Neither had she, but she was better at hiding it. Human Ambassador, Veth said, you have caused great harm to the peace of this sector. You have spread lies and rumors. You have turned species against each other. What do you have to say for yourself? Sarah stepped forward. I have spread nothing but the truth, High Counselor. Every document I have shared is real. Every word is accurate. If the truth causes harm to your empire, perhaps the problem is not with the truth. There were murmurs from the watching representatives. A Morthian diplomat stepped forward. He was short and round, with orange skin and large eyes. His people had been trading with the Velthari for 2,000 years. They had always been loyal. "We have reviewed the documents the human provided," the Morthian said. "They are genuine. Our analysts have confirmed it. The question now is what the Council intends to do about it." Veth turned his 4 eyes on the Morthian. "This is a Velthari matter. It does not concern the Federation." "With respect, High Counselor, it does," the Morthian replied. His voice was calm but firm. "The documents show that the Velthari have been cheating the Federation for over 2,000 years. We have paid billions in tribute that was never owed. We want that returned." "Impossible," Veth said. "Then we will stop all trade with the Velthari Empire effective immediately." The chamber erupted again. Other species joined in. The Dren demanded the return of 3-star systems that the Velthari had claimed were ceded voluntarily. The Korvathi demanded an end to Velthari military patrols in their space. A dozen voices were shouting at once. Sarah watched it all unfold. She had not planned this exact moment. She had not known exactly what would happen when the truth came out, but she had known something would happen. That was how it always worked. When you kept secrets for long enough, they built up pressure. And when that pressure was released, it was impossible to control. Veth finally restored order by having his guards seal the doors and threatening to arrest anyone who spoke out of turn. The other species fell silent, but their anger was clear. "This meeting is over," Veth declared. "The Council will consider these matters in private. Ambassador Chen, you are hereby expelled from Velthari space. You have 24 hours to leave." Sarah nodded calmly. "Very well, High Counselor, but before I go, I want to release one more document, the most important one." She activated her device again. Another holographic image appeared. "This is a record from 8,342 years ago. It is written by a Kellish observer who was stationed among the Velthari. It describes how the Velthari rebellion really happened." Veth's face went pale gray. "According to this record," Sarah continued, "the Kellish did not fall because they were weak or corrupt. They fell because the Velthari poisoned their water supply. They introduced a slow-acting toxin into the Kellish homeworld's ocean. It took 50 years, but eventually it made the Kellish unable to have children. The last generation of Kellish died out naturally, without ever knowing what had happened to them. The Velthari did not defeat them in battle. They committed genocide through chemistry." The chamber was dead silent. Even the guards had stopped moving. "This record also mentions that the toxin was developed in secret, using research stolen from the Kellish themselves, and it mentions that 7 other species knew about the plan and helped to carry it out. 7 species that no longer exist. 7 species that the Velthari later claimed died out naturally." Sarah looked around the room. "I wonder how many other species the Velthari have helped to disappear over the past 8,000 years." She turned off her device and looked at Veth. "I will leave your space now, High Counselor, but I think you will find that the problems I have caused are not going to leave with me." She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, she could hear the shouting begin again. The next month was chaos. Sarah returned to Station 12, which was technically in neutral space, and watched the Empire begin to crack. The Morthian Trade Federation stopped all commerce with the Velthari. The Dren mobilized their military and began patrolling the borders of their space. The Korvathi and 6 other species formed an alliance and demanded that the Velthari Council submit to an independent investigation. The Council refused. They called the accusations lies. They said the documents were forgeries created by humans. They said that Earth was trying to destabilize the sector for its own gain. But no one believed them anymore. The Velthari had spent 12,000 years building a reputation for cruelty and deception. Now that reputation was working against them. "Ambassador Chen," Marcus said one morning, "we have a problem." Sarah looked up from her coffee. It was the first real coffee she had been able to get in weeks. A human supply ship had finally arrived. What kind of problem? The Velthari have declared war on the Morthian Federation. They are sending ships to blockade Morthian space. Sarah set down her cup. That is not a problem. That is exactly what I was afraid of. She had known this might happen. When empires feel threatened, they often turn to force. It was the oldest trick in the book. Create an external enemy to distract from internal problems. Rally the people behind a common cause. Show strength to hide weakness. But Sarah had hoped the Velthari were smart enough to avoid it. What do we do? Marcus asked. We talk to everyone, Sarah said. The Dren, the Korvathi, everyone. We help them coordinate. We help them share information. The Velthari are powerful, but they are not powerful enough to fight everyone at once. If the other species stand together, the Velthari will have to back down. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked without sleep. She sent messages to every species in the sector. She organized meetings. She shared intelligence about Velthari ship movements. She helped the Morthians understand Velthari tactics. She helped the Dren find weaknesses in Velthari defensive systems. She did not give them weapons. She did not send troops. Humanity had no troops to send. Earth's few military ships were far away, defending human space. All Sarah had was information. But information, as it turned out, was enough. The Velthari blockade of Morthian space failed within 3 days. The Morthians had been warned exactly where the Velthari ships would be. They had moved their trade routes to avoid them. The blockade caught nothing but empty space. Veth was furious. He ordered his fleet to pursue the Morthian ships into neutral territory. But when the Velthari fleet crossed into neutral space, they found the Dren waiting for them. The Korvathi were there too, and the Thessians and the Korak and a dozen other species. All of them had been warned. All of them had coordinated. All of them were ready. The Velthari admiral in command of the fleet had a choice. He could start a war with half the sector, or he could withdraw. After 3 tense hours of standoff, he chose to withdraw. Sarah watched the sensor feeds as the Velthari ships turned around and went home. She allowed herself a small smile. It is working, Marcus said. His voice was filled with wonder. It is starting to work, Sarah corrected. The Velthari have not given up yet. They will try something else. They always do. She was right. The Velthari tried many things over the following months. They tried to divide the alliance by offering special deals to individual species. They tried to assassinate key leaders. They tried to spread their own propaganda. They tried to hack into communication systems. They tried bribery. They tried threats. Nothing worked. The alliance held firm. And the more the Velthari tried to hold on to power, the more they lost. Species that had been neutral began to join the alliance. Species that had been Velthari allies began to question their loyalty. Even within Velthari space, there were signs of trouble. Some of the noble families had begun to argue with each other. Some were saying that the council had made mistakes. Some were even saying that perhaps the humans were right. Sarah knew that she was walking a dangerous path. She was not just changing a few policies. She was not just getting a seat at the table. She was helping to tear down an empire that had lasted for 12,000 years. That kind of change was never peaceful. People would die. Perhaps a lot of people. She had to make sure it was worth it. One night she received a message on her private channel. It was encrypted with a code she did not recognize. When she decoded it, she found a simple text message. Ambassador Chen, this is Counselor Meth of House Verdrani. I wish to speak with you in private. I believe we may have common interests. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Counselor Meth was the third most powerful member of the Velthari Council. If he was reaching out to her, something big was happening. She sent a reply agreeing to meet. 3 days later, she was on a small shuttle traveling to a remote moon in neutral space. Marcus stayed behind. If this was a trap, Sarah did not want him caught in it. The meeting place was an abandoned mining station that had been empty for 200 years. Sarah walked through the dusty corridors until she reached a cargo bay where a single Velthari waited. He was younger than Veth, with the silver markings of high noble birth covering his face and arms. His 4 eyes watched her carefully as she approached. "Ambassador Chen," Meth said, "thank you for coming." "You took a risk contacting me," Sarah said. "If Veth finds out, you will be executed for treason." "Perhaps," Meth agreed. "But I believe some risks are worth taking. You see, I have read the documents you released, all of them, including the ones about the Kellish." "And what did you think?" Meth was silent for a moment. "I think that my species has done terrible things. I think we have built our empire on blood and lies. I think that if we continue down this path, we will destroy ourselves and take many others with us." Sarah watched him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to change things," Meth said. "There are others like me on the council. We are not many, but we are growing. We believe that the Velthari need a new way, a way that does not depend on fear and secrets." He paused. "We want to know if the humans will help us." Sarah thought about what he was asking. It was one thing to help the other species resist the Velthari. It was another thing to help the Velthari reform themselves from within. That was a much more dangerous game. If she agreed and the reformers failed, she would be blamed. If she refused and they succeeded without her, she would lose any influence she had gained. "What exactly do you want?" she asked. "I want to remove Veth from power. I want to open the council to other species. I want to make the Velthari part of the sector instead of its masters." Meth looked at her with his 4 glowing eyes. "I want to do what you humans did to us. I want to bring the truth into the light." Sarah smiled slowly. "That," she said, "is something I can definitely help with." The plan took 6 months to prepare. Sarah worked closely with Counselor Meth and his allies, sharing information and coordinating their moves. At the same time, she continued to support the alliance of species that had formed against the Velthari. It was a delicate balance. She had to weaken the Velthari Empire enough to force change, but not so much that it collapsed into chaos. The key moment came when Meth provided her with a new set of documents. These were not ancient records. They were recent. They showed that High Counselor Veth had been secretly planning to use a biological weapon against the Morthian Federation. The same kind of slow-acting poison that the Velthari had used against the Kellish 8,000 years ago. "He was going to do it again," Meth said when he gave her the files. "I found out 3 months ago. I have been working ever since to stop him. The weapon is already being produced. The delivery system is being tested. If I had not discovered the plan, millions of Morthians would have started dying within 5 years. They would never have known why." Sarah felt sick as she read the details, the coldness of it, the calculation. Veth was willing to commit genocide rather than accept change. "We have to release this," Sarah said. "I know," Meth agreed. "But when we do, Veth will know someone betrayed him. He will look for the traitor. He will find me. Then we have to act fast, release the documents and move against him at the same time." Meth nodded slowly. "My allies and I have been preparing for this. We have support from 4 of the 12 council seats. We have contacts in the military who are loyal to us. If we move at the right moment, we can arrest Veth and his closest supporters before they can react. And the other council members, the ones who are not on your side. Some will join us when they see that we are winning. Others will try to fight. We will have to be ready for that." Sarah spent the next 2 weeks helping Meth prepare. She coordinated with the Alliance species to make sure they were ready to support the change. She helped Meth draft a new constitution for the Velthari government, one that included representation for other species. She arranged for human communication equipment to be smuggled into Velthari space so that Meth's supporters could coordinate without being detected. On the day of the move, Sarah watched the feeds from her office on Station 12. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to Meth and his allies. The first sign that things were working was when the documents about the biological weapon were broadcast across every communication channel in the sector. Sarah had helped Meth set that up. The release was timed to coincide with a council meeting, so that all the Velthari leaders would be in one place when the news hit. The reaction was immediate. The Alliance species demanded an emergency session of the Sector Council. The Morthians began mobilizing their fleet. Even Velthari citizens were shocked. Most of them had believed the old story about the Kellish dying out naturally. Now they were learning that their own government had planned to do the same thing again. In the council chamber, Veth tried to deny everything. He said the documents were fake. He said it was a human plot, but Meth stood up and called for a vote of no confidence. 4 council members voted with him. 3 more joined when they saw which way the wind was blowing. Veth ordered his guards to arrest Meth. The guards refused. They had already been contacted by Meth's military supporters. They had already been shown the evidence. They had already decided where their loyalty lay. Within 3 hours, Veth was under arrest. So were 7 other council members who had supported his plans. Meth stood before the chamber and announced that a new government would be formed. It would include representatives from all species in the sector. It would be based on truth and cooperation, not fear and secrets. The Velthari Empire, the power that had dominated the Orion sector for 12,000 years, was over. Sarah watched the announcement on her screen. Marcus stood beside her, looking stunned. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "No," Sarah said. "Meth did it. The Alliance did it. All those species who decided they were tired of being pushed around did it. I just helped them see what was possible." "But it started with you. You were the one who found the truth. You were the one who released it." Sarah shook her head. "The truth was always there, Marcus. The Velthari knew it. The other species suspected it. I just made it impossible to ignore. That is all diplomacy really is. Helping people see what they already know but do not want to face." Messages were flooding in from every corner of the sector. The Morthians were celebrating. The Dren were celebrating. Even some Velthari were celebrating, the ones who had suffered under the old government. It would take years to sort out all the details. There would be negotiations and compromises. There would be problems and setbacks, but the fundamental change had happened. The old order was gone. Something new was being born. 3 months later, Sarah stood before the new sector council. It met in a new chamber, one that was designed to hold representatives from all species on equal footing. There were no thrones, no high seats, no black stone and silver metal designed to intimidate. Everyone sat at the same level, around a great circular table. Councillor Meth, now the elected leader of the Velthari, introduced her. "Ambassador Chen," Meth said, "1 year ago you came to Velthari space as a representative of a young species. You had no ships, you had no weapons, you had nothing but your words and your courage, and yet you changed everything." He paused and looked around the chamber at the representatives of 47 species. They were all watching Sarah. The Morthians with their orange skin, the Dren with their tall, thin bodies, the Korvathi with their multiple arms. Dozens of species who had lived in fear of the Velthari for centuries. "We owe her a debt that we can never fully repay," Meth continued. "She showed us that the old ways were not the only ways. She showed us that truth is more powerful than fear. She showed us that even the smallest voice can change the galaxy if it speaks the right words." He turned back to Sarah. "On behalf of the Sector Council, I want to offer humanity a permanent seat at this table, not because you are powerful, not because you are old, but because you have shown us what true diplomacy looks like. You have earned your place among us." Sarah stepped forward. She thought about all the work that had brought her to this moment. The months of research, the dangerous meetings, the sleepless nights, the times when she had been afraid that everything would fall apart. "Thank you, Counselor," she said. "Humanity is honored to accept." She paused and looked around at the gathered representatives. But I want to say one thing. What I did was not special. It was not some unique human ability. It was just what anyone would do who believed that truth and justice are more important than power and fear. She thought about Veth, now in prison awaiting trial. She thought about all the Velthari who had suffered under his rule. She thought about the Kelish, who had died 8,000 years ago without ever knowing what had happened to them. The Velthari made a mistake, she continued. They thought that because they were powerful they did not have to be just. They thought that because they had secrets they did not have to be truthful. They thought that because they were old they did not have to change. She shook her head. Every empire that has ever existed has made the same mistake, and every empire that has made that mistake has eventually fallen. She looked at Meth. The question now is whether we can do better, whether we can build something that lasts, not because of power but because of trust, not because of fear but because of cooperation. That is the challenge before us, and that is the challenge that humanity is ready to help meet. She sat down. Around her, the representatives began to talk among themselves. They were already starting to work on the details, the treaties, the trade agreements, the military arrangements. It would take years, it would take patience, but it would happen. Marcus caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small smile. She nodded back. She had come to this sector as an ambassador from a young species. She had been told that humanity was too new to matter, too weak to be heard, too small to make a difference. She had proved them wrong. And she had done it not with ships or weapons, but with the oldest tools in the universe: words, truth, and the willingness to stand up and speak even when everyone told her to be silent. That was the human way. That was what humanity brought to the stars. Not power, not technology, just the stubborn belief that things could be better. The refusal to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. It was a small thing, really, just a choice, just a voice, just a single person deciding to act. But as Sarah had learned, small things could change the galaxy, one truth at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time. Outside the chamber windows, the stars burned bright in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, other empires were watching. Other species were taking note. They had seen what happened to the Velthari. They had seen what one human diplomat had done with nothing but information and determination. They would remember. And the next time they looked down at a young species and thought they could be pushed around, they would think twice, because they would know that somewhere in that young species might be someone like Sarah Chen, someone with the courage to speak the truth, someone with the patience to wait for the right moment, someone who understood that the greatest power in the universe was not ships or weapons or ancient empires. It was the power to change minds. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. That was what made them special, not strength or speed or technology, just the simple belief that every voice matters, every truth deserves to be heard, every species deserves a seat at the table. The Velthari had learned that lesson the hard way. The Kelish had paid for it 8,000 years ago. Now, finally, the sector had a chance to build something better. Sarah looked out at the stars and allowed herself to hope. Others would learn this lesson too. Some would learn it peacefully. Some would learn it the hard way, like the Velthari had. And humanity would be there for all of it, teaching, helping, building bridges, speaking truth to power. Because that was what diplomats did. That was what humans did. They talked, they listened, they found common ground. And sometimes, when the old ways were too cruel to continue, they helped tear them down so something better could grow. The Velthari Empire was gone. A new sector council had risen from its ashes. 47 species were learning to work together for the first time in 12,000 years. It was a good start. Sarah Chen smiled and turned back to the work ahead. There was still so much to do, so many old wounds to heal, so many new relationships to build. But humanity was ready. They had always been ready. They just needed the chance to prove it.